A little while ago, I received a leaflet in the post from Thomas Pringle TD. He's an independent TD in the constituency of Donegal. In the leaflet, there's one particular paragraph which I find interesting. Interesting because it's been included when it could so easily have been left out. And I think that it speaks to a problem, perhaps, that left-wing politicians are increasingly going to have. So first of all, I'm going to just briefly go through the leaflet, and then I'll just discuss what are the main thrusts set forth in this leaflet overall, and then I'll comment on the interesting paragraph. We start off with a piece titled "Government Continues to Fail Homeowners." A number of houses for a number of years were built using defective concrete blocks. So people have bought houses and now they are becoming unlivable, and yet they're still paying a mortgage on them or whatever. The government has failed the people on this issue. The next piece is titled "No More Empty Words," and it's about homelessness in Ireland. Apparently in April it exceeded 12,000 for the first time. We have a short piece called "Reliable Transport," and that's basically to say that there's inadequate or unreliable bus services and airline services to Donegal town and from Carrickfinn Airport. There's a piece called "More Ambulances." Essentially, Thomas Pringle has identified 3 extra ambulances that are needed in order to serve the community. There's a piece called "No Cashless Banks," and he wants the government to introduce law to protect cash. There's a piece, "Commitment to Killybegs Campus Welcomed." So this is adding Killybegs campus to the Atlantic Technical University. So the next piece is called "No Delays in Mother and Baby Homes Decisions." We're kind of like workhouses. I think the Magdalene laundries were either similar or a part of this. And there were various abuses that went on, but the government's dragging its heels on actually giving them redress or compensation. "Irish Neutrality Deserves a Citizens' Assembly" is the next piece. And essentially, Ireland is a neutral country, but the powers that be, essentially want that to end. A citizens' assembly, the idea is that rather than the government bringing about a referendum and it being a top-down thing, it's about you get random members of the public into an assembly, and they listen to the experts on one side or the other, and then they can recommend to the government should there be a referendum or not. Is that there's a creeping move to get rid of the neutrality, and a citizens' assembly is a way of, in theory, putting it to the people first. The next piece is called "Staffing Levels Must Be Addressed." So this is that hospitals are overcrowded and there aren't enough nurses and doctors. The next piece is called "Fishermen Deserve Long Overdue Fuel Subsidies." Now apparently the fishing vessel fuel is exempt from tax, but the inland fleet is using petrol for outboard motors and they have to pay the full price, so they're not benefiting. Therefore a subsidy is needed. The next one is called "Acres Deadline Coming Up." So acres, or that's an acronym, so it's ACRES, but acres. I think it's to do with a farming subsidy, and the farmers have to basically return the paperwork for this in order to receive it. One about beef imports, importing beef from the UK, and then trying to figure out, is it from the UK or has it come through somewhere else first? And then a nature restoration law that the government needs to take it seriously and not run away from it. There's a piece called "Inquiry into Disability Services Needed," incidents and abuse in HSE-run residential homes, and that the HSE knew about these years in advance before anyone was told. Then there is one, "Food Banks Show Failed Government Policies." So essentially the fact that people are needing to go to food banks is evidence that the economy is not working despite the government saying that it is. There's a piece here called "Water Referendum Needed." If you have a rural area, it might not be economically viable to supply them with water, and so a private company might just decide not to supply them, and a referendum making water a right would prevent that from happening. There is a small piece down in the corner. It doesn't have its own headline, but it is separate from all the other paragraphs. It's just to do with there's difficulties recruiting teachers and retaining them. The next piece is "Supporting Our Credit Unions." Basically, the credit union is an alternative to a bank. It's based in the local community. There's a piece here called "Target Supports." So this was when energy prices were going up and the government was giving out energy credits to help people who were facing massive and spiraling costs. And it's basically saying that the prices have come down. The price for gas has come down in the raw materials, but the actual energy companies have not reduced their prices that they're charging people. And then there's a piece called Government Continues to Rush Bills. So this is one where a bill will go through the Dáil and get voted on without anyone having time to read it. And it's also about bills being passed but not being started. So the bill is on the books, but it's not being enforced, or there's parts of bills that are not being enforced. The two main themes of this leaflet could be summarized as we don't trust the government and supply and demand. We have shortages of things. So if we look at not trusting the government, we don't trust them with regards to the defective concrete blocks because they're not paying out the compensation. We don't trust them with regards to homelessness because they're making it so that private developers can make money rather than providing houses. We don't trust them with regards to the money in mother and baby homes, or the Irish neutrality, or the nature restoration, or the fuel subsidies, or the residential care homes where there's abuses taking place. We don't trust them with regards to the economy because people require food banks. We don't trust them with regards to the energy companies and energy prices because they're not doing anything about the prices coming down. And we don't trust them with regards to the bills that they pass because they rush them through, or they don't enact the bills that they have rushed through. So overall, we don't really trust these people. The second main thrust is the idea of supply and demand, or that we don't have enough of things. So we don't have enough houses because we have homeless people. We don't have enough buses and planes from Donegal to Dublin. We don't have enough ambulances in Donegal. We don't have enough hospital beds because they're overcrowded. We don't have enough of things, and we don't trust our government. Those are the two main thrusts. So we'll bear that in mind as we go into the interesting paragraph. The interesting paragraph is titled Standing in Solidarity. And really it's a refugees welcome, no cap on immigration, Ireland for all. Literally, there's a picture of Thomas Pringle TD with an Ireland for all poster. That Ireland is not full. And even if we got rid of all the migrants, we'd still have the problems that we have now. The paragraph is interesting because he's just made the case repeatedly of all these shortages, that supply is not meeting demand. And then in this extra paragraph, he says that he's in favor of the demand going up. So the supply is already short. He wants the supply to be even shorter, even though he's identified supply being short as a problem. But he's made the point repeatedly that essentially the government can't be trusted. They're either incompetent or they're malignant. And yet he trusts them with regards to immigration. He doesn't see that immigration is somehow part of this corruption or maleficence. Without that interesting paragraph, one would come to the obvious conclusion that if there are so many shortages, the last thing we need is more people. And if we can't trust the government on all these different issues, then we can't trust them on any issue, including immigration. That would be the obvious, I think, logical deduction. And yet he's had to dispel that with this extra paragraph. I think that, by the way, is why he's had to include it, because I think reading back on this without that paragraph, one would come to the same conclusions that any far-right party would come to. We have all these shortages, therefore we don't need more immigrants. We don't trust the government, therefore we don't trust them with regards to immigration. But because the far-right are the bad guys, Thomas Pringle's had to put in this, essentially this disclaimer in at the end. And the trouble is, it's a bit clumsy because it's kind of incongruous with the rest of the leaflet. It undermines two of his main themes. And I think there's another issue with it as well. I had a video about not saying things, not putting in disclaimers. So if you say something and you introduce it into a conversation, then that puts the other person in a position to attack what you've said. Whereas if you don't say it and they try to attack you, then you can counterattack their attacks and it's much easier on you. And so if he'd said nothing about immigrants whatsoever, then people could have accused him of being far right, and then he could have shot down the accusations. As it is, he's included a justification of having more immigration. And that leaves people like me or anybody else in a position to shoot down those justifications. So I think it was a misstep to include this. So to go through this paragraph, I'll just read the first part verbatim. Quote, "The far right are exploiting public concerns to stoke racist hatreds under the guise of Irishness, yet the ideas they spread could not be more anti-Irish." Close quote. So that's his point. that not wanting immigrants is anti-Irish and wanting them is Irish, essentially. That's ridiculous. The Irish could not exist as a people distinct from the English, the Welsh, the Scottish, if they did not resist influence from foreign people. It also cannot be more Irish to want there to be fewer Irish people in the country of Ireland. So that's just a ridiculous thing. But the fact that he's had to put that down means it's now there to be shot down. So we move on. Quote, "The sad reality is that the state plays a role in this, subtly at times and more obviously at other times. Even some of the opportunist opposition have fed into the dangerous narrative that Ireland is full, despite the fact that our population is below pre-famine levels, and we have over 150,000 vacant homes in this country." Close quote. So the idea that Ireland is full is a dangerous narrative, even though Thomas Pringle has just laid out all the reasons how Ireland is full. Homeless people, not enough ambulances, overcrowding in hospitals. But, we could definitely take in way more people. Not just way more people, 3 million more people. The pre-famine population was 8 million. Well, we can't even handle 5 million. So this idea that, well, it used to be higher in the past, it was different in the past. Right now, we can't take more people. So that's irrelevant. It's also, I think, fallacious to say, well, it used to be higher in the past, therefore it can go up now. I mean, child mortality was higher in the past. So should we be laid back if it goes up now? That's ridiculous. And then he says, well, you have 150,000 vacant homes in this country. Well, a lot of good 150,000 vacant homes are going to do if we bring in 3 million more people. That's one. And the other one is, it seems it doesn't matter because we have 12,000 homeless people. So we might, for all the good they're doing, it doesn't matter. And bringing in more people won't help. Now the last little piece of this interesting paragraph. Quote, "The reality is that if every migrant left Ireland tomorrow, we would still have a housing crisis, a cost of living crisis, and a crisis in our healthcare system." Close quote. Right, so now he's saying that we actually do have a crisis in all of these things, even though he said just a second ago that Ireland isn't full. Sounds like it is. And the next one is that, well, if we got rid of 60% of the problem, we'd still have 40% of the problem. Therefore, we shouldn't do it. I mean, we don't apply that logic to any other problem that we have. If I could get rid of 60% of my debts and still be left with 40%, I think I'd rather that than 100%. Now, I don't know that it is 60%, but it's some non-zero percentage. And essentially he's saying that, well, we'd still have some of the problem if we have all the migrants left, therefore none of them should leave. And we'll be stuck with the whole of the problem instead. He'd rather have the whole of the problem than less than the whole of the problem. Well, that's ridiculous. I find the inclusion of the interesting paragraph so interesting because it seemed so obviously like a mistake and yet it was willingly done. It just signals a lack of confidence and a weakness about this particular politician, and I think this is something that left-wing politicians in general are going to have to face. I mean, on the one hand, he makes the point so well that Ireland is full, and then he comes out and says Ireland's not full. He doesn't trust the government, but he does trust immigration, which the government also wants. There's ambiguity there, and you do not want ambiguity as a politician. You want people to know what you're for and what you're not for, and not have them having to guess, because if they have to guess, they're not going to trust you. And as a politician, you want to be trusted. You want to be seen as sincere. And people can't know if you're sincere if you're ambiguous. Thomas Pringle was not confident enough to be unambiguous. And that's, I think, the main problem. That's kind of really what struck me instinctively as I read this. Because he seemed so confident right up until that paragraph. And suddenly something seemed amiss. And if I picked up on that immediately, it's only when I've been thinking about it that I've thought why it stood out. But it'll stand out to other people, even though they won't think about it. But they will instinctively pick up on the fact that this guy lacks confidence in himself. And how can you be confident in a man who's not confident in himself? I think that this is going to lose him votes. And I think all left-wing politicians are going to end up losing votes as time goes by. Because they can't seriously critique the government from the left without being seen as far-right, unless they put in some kind of clumsy disclaimer which introduces ambiguity about what they believe. Going forward, the far-right is not going to be ambiguous. They are not going to lack confidence. and people will be attracted to that. So I just thought it was just interesting to see it in this document. I think that it's a kind of a harbinger of something to come. It won't have a big impact at the next election, but I think it's going to have a cumulative effect.